We know some things about the Corinthians, right? We know that the Corinthians were going beyond the scope of Scripture. You can look at chapter 4, verse 6. Paul says, I'm talking this way. I'm applying these things to myself and Apollos so that you'll learn by us not to go beyond what's written. So they had shifted past Scripture. The Scripture said something, and the Corinthian Christians said, I know that we're Christians, but we're actually, that part of the Bible is irrelevant to us. We're going to do something else. We know that about the Corinthians. We know that they were boasting in one preacher over another, whether it was Paul or Apollos or whoever. So they're very proud. We know they were also very self-exalting. They had exalted themselves. We know about the Corinthians that they carried themselves in such a way that they had forgotten that everything that they had received was actually a gift. And so some Corinthians were probably really good public speakers. Others had maybe they were really wealthy, but they had engaged in their gift, or they had owned their wealth in such a way that they thought, that didn't come from God, I earned this myself. So they're they had this superiority complex, and we know that about the Corinthians. The worst thing, though, about the Corinthians was that they thought that they had arrived spiritually. Anybody know somebody like this, where you talk to them and they just think, you're like Jesus. You're literally perfect. When's the last time you sinned? How many years ago? Wow, 20 years ago? You know what I'm saying? They just think that they have arrived spiritually, and that's what these Corinthians thought of themselves. They were no longer in need of the sanctifying grace of Jesus Christ, and Paul says to them, you are so mistaken, and you're so blinded, and you're so arrogant, you can't even see how bad you're missing it. Look at Paul's life. Paul frequently made a public spectacle. Paul frequently goes without food or water. He frequently knows what it means to be in need materially and physically. He was dependent on manual labor to meet his basic needs. He was cursed, persecuted, and slandered, treated as a worthless nobody by people outside the Christian faith. And Paul lived there because he knew that this is where God had him. He knew that this is, even though it looks like foolishness to the world, he knew that that's what the gospel was requiring of him. And Paul would rather live in the power of the gospel, embracing suffering, than live outside of the power of the gospel and experience comfort on this physical earth. He was empowered by the gospel, committed to the furtherance of the gospel, to the glory of God, and he's softly but firmly bringing these Corinthian Christians back in and saying, what you see there, this worldly wisdom that you're following is not true wisdom. This influence and power that you think that you have is not true wisdom. It's not true power. You need to reestablish yourself in the gospel.